And welcome back to the show, everybody. My name is Shane. I'm here with Mark.
Good evening.
Okay, we got Halloween Mark here, and we are the Fantasy Football Pros. So today we are going to continue on our Fantasy Football for Dummies by Dummies Part 2.
And we are the Dummies.
We are definitely the Dummies. So take that with a grain of salt.
Then again, but if you ask my wife, I'm the asshole also. Can we air that?
Absolutely. Anyway, and we'll be talking about different types of leagues. Now, remember, if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, like, comment to our podcasts. It just helps. It helps the show. And you can follow us on Twitter at the Pros FF and on Instagram at the Fantasy Football Pros for any extra content. You can also submit any questions via Twitter or at our website at www.thefantasyfootballpros.com. Okay, so you are new to fantasy football, and one very, very important thing to get you started is picking the right league. Now, you can have there's a plethora of different kind of leagues you can join in fantasy football, but if you get into one that's a little too complicated for a beginner, it could totally deter you from wanting to play, and you're finding that the learning curve is too large, and you're just getting defeated, and you're no longer having fun, and you're like quitting halfway through, and you don't want to do that.
And let's face it, people are joining these leagues to have fun, but also to make money. If you're not successful at it and you keep donating every year, it's not as fun as when you're actually in the hunt for the moolah. So this is probably the most important thing you're going to do besides drafting your team, is figuring out what league, what type of league you should join. After you decide, when you look at all the basics of what each league is and what it takes for each league, once you decide what's the best league for you, then you can start doing your draft strategy, because you can't do your draft strategy until you figure out what type of league you want to get into.
Absolutely. And there's different draft strategies depending on what kind of league and the scoring system that you have.
And we're going to go through those today for you, give you some good examples, and then you can decide.
So first we'll be talking about scoring leagues, and not exactly a league, but it's a scoring format. And you can throw these into any different kind of a league, and we'll explain that as we get into it. So first we'll start talking about standard scoring leagues. That is your typical scoring league. Normally, the running backs are the higher scoring players for these types of leagues. There's no extra benefits for getting any catches. I mean, it is exactly what it sounds. It's your basic, regular fantasy football. There's no bonuses given anywhere unless, there's anything in the scoring format. And it'll make sense as we move along. So if you're not playing in a standard league, you might be playing in a half-point PPR league. And the PPR stands for points per reception. And that means whenever, your wide receiver, your tight end, or your running back catches the ball, they will get half a point. So if you have, a wide receiver that's called a possession receiver, and those are the guys that run the shorter routes and they get a lot of targets, they get a lot of catches, those guys tend to score a lot more points than they typically would in a standard league, because they're getting those just extra bonus points just for catching the ball. Like you can catch a ball for negative yards and actually gain points out of that. And then you have a full point PPR league, which is just you get one whole point. And I like those the most. I think Mark does too. And it just gives you more points for those guys that, get a lot of catches. And this also adds a lot of value to receiving running backs.
Well, it's like when you go to a baseball game, Shane. Do you want to go see runs scored, or do you want to see a 2-1 game?
Exactly. I want to see a high scoring game.
Right. People enjoy that. Now, there's some of those weirdos out there that like to see the 1-0 game. And dudes, you are weird. The scoring leagues, that's why we like the PPR. There's more action to it. It holds your attention longer. It's a fun way of doing things.
And it makes more players relevant.
Yes.
Then there are touchdown leagues. Now, those are, you literally only score points if your player gets a touchdown. It doesn't matter how many yards, how many catches at all whatsoever. If your guy scores a touchdown, you get points. So you only want guys that are like your running backs. You're mainly looking for like those big, bulky running backs that are the goal line back because they have the best chance of scoring those touchdowns.
First of all, this league, the people who join this league, I mean, in my opinion, this is a boring ass league.
Yeah, I say that they hate life.
No, they hate the DH also in baseball. You know,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? These are these guys. Now, because for me, any league where Jordan Howard is relevant is a bad league to be in. Jordan Howard is ex-Bear, ex-Philadelphia Eagle, who you would see his game stats being 2 carries, 2 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. Just a big guy, doesn't move that well, but he's hard to tackle. And he can get you that 1 yard.
Yeah, it might take him 4 tries to get that 1 yard, but he'll get that 1 yard.
Yeah. It's just like what Mark was just saying earlier. Do you want to see a 1-0 baseball game, or do you want to see like a 12-13 score game? Touchdowns are just, they're so like it's so hard to predict touchdowns compared to yards that any given player will get, that it's just not. I've never even tried one. It doesn't look entertaining whatsoever.
Yeah, I've never played in one of these leagues because it's just never been one where I'm like, oh, I want to join that league. I would not want to join one of these leagues, but they are out there, and this might be a league. And I'm sorry for making fun of you if you are one of those guys who other things we said that don't believe in the DH, want to see a 2-run game in baseball, all that. And so TD leagues are for you. Great. That's for you. It's not for us, but it is out there. And we want to make sure you're aware that that type of league is out there for you.
Next league we'll talk about is tight end premium. Typically in fantasy football, tight ends don't score that many points, and it's not really the format of the league. It's more of how the NFL works. Unless you're talking about the top 3 guys, they don't get that many yardage. They'll get some touchdowns, but they don't get many catches either. So they tend to score the least amount of points, and thus being one of the least important positions. So this brings value to that position, and it has them score as many, if not more, points than wide receivers and running backs. So they, depending on the league scoring, they can get extra points for how many yards they're getting, how many catches, or how many touchdowns. So it just adds a little extra value to that position, which is kind of nice. And speaking of which, we'll move on to Superflex. So when you have a starting roster, you're going to have a quarterback, you're going to have running backs, you're going to have tight ends, you're going to have wide receivers, kicker, defense, and you're also going to have a flex position. And the flex position typically will have running back or wide receiver. It's interchangeable, whatever you want to throw in. But with a super flex, you're allowed to throw in a quarterback, and quarterbacks tend to score a lot of points, especially if you have a good one. So that could be a completely different draft strategy because, your number one draft pick would be a quarterback because it's so valuable to get one of those top quarterbacks in one of these leagues, and then having like a really good, decent backup as your flex position.
Yeah. So, like in a regular redraft league or any league, most of the times, Shane and I are in the same belief that you don't want to be selecting a quarterback in the first 5 rounds, 6 rounds, because there's a lot of value out there because you're only using one quarterback every week. So if you're in a 12-team league, you're going to have a good quarterback. You're going to have a starting quarterback in the NFL. If you're in a super flex league, you're drafting 2 QBs that have an opportunity to score a lot of points for your fantasy team. You're going to put such more premium on that you might actually have 2 quarterbacks drafted within the first 6 rounds instead of not even selecting one in the first 6 rounds. Totally different.
Yeah. So like compared to like a regular league where there are always like decent free agent quarterbacks that you can just pick up and start. And as Superflex, you won't have that option. All the good ones are taken. people have 2 to 3 quarterbacks on the roster. I mean, chances are there's no quarterbacks unless they're backup quarterbacks that are in free agency. So you are drafting your quarterbacks and that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Now that you know the different types of scoring leagues, there are 2 different ways that these can play out. You can either play head to head versus one other player. And, every given week that player will change. You play different teams. Or the scoring can go total points where you're playing against everybody. And it's like the top half scores all get wins and the bottom half all get losses. Now we'll go into the different types of leagues. Now there's the typical standard redraft league. It's like a fresh start every year. So you're literally just drafting your team, and then after the season's over, that team is gone. The new season comes around, you're drafting a completely brand new team. You don't get to keep anybody.
This is the league. This is the league that it's easiest to maintain year to year. When we started getting into these next ones, which are like, the keeper league or the dynasty league and all these different things, when we start getting into those, you're going to see the difference of them. In this league, because you have a clean slate every year, you don't have to have a strategy going into your draft of, well, who do I want for next year? You don't have to have the strategy before the draft of, well, what round do I want to take? Do I want to use this guy in this round? Do I want to use this guy in that round for my team? There's all these different things you got to think about if it's not a redraft league. If it's a redraft league, it is a clean slate. Forget about what happened last year. Forget about the players you had on your team last year. You starting fresh. So it's the easiest league to maintain year to year.
Yeah, and you're only thinking about what will they produce this season. You don't care about the future at all whatsoever.
Exactly.
If you're brand new to football, that is a really, really good option for you to choose. Now, there are best ball leagues, which are very, very popular for kind of like the season right now is before football. Is you can start doing mock drafts in best ball leagues. And best ball leagues are really interesting. It's where you draft your team, and then after the draft, you don't do anything with your team. You cannot do a single trade. You cannot pick up anybody from free agencies. You don't adjust your roster, your starting lineup at all whatsoever. So the highest scoring player at each position will be the guy that played for you. So what you'd like to do is, I'd say towards the middle and end of the draft, you're drafting guys with extremely high upside, or has, as we explained earlier, the definition of the high ceiling. Guys that can score a lot of points, but they also might have a really low floor. So if you're playing in a regular, like standard league, those guys aren't typically the greatest to start because they can totally bomb for you and give you 0 points. But in a best ball, if they score 0 points, then they just don't score for you. Somebody else would score for you in their place. But if they do blow up and get 3 touchdowns, 150 yards, then that guy is scoring for you, unless someone somehow did better.
Shane, I was actually in 5 of these leagues last year. I love the best ball because it's one of those things where you can still opportunity to win money. Okay. You still have draft strategy going into it. So there's still some competitiveness to it. Right. But you don't have to watch it week to week as far as, when you're not cutting people, when you're not picking up people, when you're not trading people, when you're not setting your lineup, when you're just once you've done your homework and have done your draft, it's just sit back and watch it then. So for me, I was able to do 5. You can do 6. You can do 7. You can do a lot of these redraft. These best ball leagues if you want to, because all it is the work going into it for the draft, and then the rest of the time you could spend on your weekly leagues, your seasonal long leagues that are ones that you have to maintain. This one you don't maintain. You draft and you're done. And thank God I was able to actually win money last year doing it. I won a couple of those leagues actually. And the strategy Shane just talked about, I used in that and it helped me. So for instance, a Deshaun Jackson, most leagues, he wouldn't even be playing. All right. It's not one because he will suck. Let me repeat this. He will suck for 11 weeks. But I guarantee you, 2 weeks out of the year, he's going to have these phenomenal weeks that come out of nowhere where he just explodes. He will win best ball leagues because of that. So in best ball leagues, you need players that will have that explosion on a week or 2 weeks that'll help you win that 1 week, or help you get those points from that 1 week. You don't need them every week. You need them 1 or 2 weeks of the year, and that's all you need. So those type of players that you normally wouldn't draft in regular leagues, you would draft them in a best ball. Now, you don't want a whole team like that.
No,
You know,
because you can put up a whole big zero.
yeah. I mean, you don't want a whole team like that, but yeah, you would like one player or two players on that team that have that upside like that.
And like I said, if you're new to football, this is really good to practice your drafts, because these are real people going in the draft, putting in real money. It's like $1 or $2 for these drafts, but it gives you like a good practice run on drafts. But like I said, this is a different draft strategy than other leagues, so it is going to be a little bit different.
And you can actually, there are best ball leagues. You can get them on daily fantasy sites. We'll have these leagues also. I know DraftKings is going to have some of these this year, but you can join these for $100 a team, even up to $1,000 a team. So you can still win big money on these leagues, and it really then the other thing with that, and saying that, in these other leagues, like next week we're going to talk about strategy for trades and stuff like that. In these type of leagues, you really have to have, some people are really good at drafts and not good at knowing when to pick players up during the season or trade or anything like that. And then other people aren't great at the draft, but they're fantastic at pickups, the waiver wire, trades, that type of stuff. This type of league, if you're doing a best ball league, you have to be great at the draft. You have to have the ins and outs of that draft down and written down and have a strategy going with it, because the draft is everything. The draft is everything.
And the next type of league is called DFS, which stands for Daily Fantasy Sports League. Now, I think this is one of Mark's favorites, is where you don't have a team. You are picking up this team per week, and everyone in your league, which you can play with randos or you can play with like family and friends, like a typical league, is that everyone could have the same players if they want. So you're given a budget, and each player has a price tag, and you can't not go over that budget, but you have to fill up your roster within that budget.
It is what it sounds like. Many of us that are looking to get into leagues might be already playing daily fantasy already. Okay. So if you're that player, you already know what the DFS is, where you're just picking up players week to week on a $60,000 budget, plug in the players to fit that budget, and then accumulating the points for that week and that week only. That's a DFS. All right. Now the DFS League takes it to the next level. The DFS League, which is starting to become more popular, especially on your FanDuels and on your DraftKings. What they're doing then is you are joining a league for a whole season, not just week to week. It is a season-long league, but you're using that same daily concept every week. So you're selecting your team week to week to week. You don't have any head-to-heads. There's no draft before the league starts. It is week to week to week, and then you accumulate the points over that year, and whoever has the most points at the end of the league season is the winner and wins the moolah.
Now we'll be talking about what I consider to be more of hardcore leagues. So if you are a beginner, you've never played fantasy football, I do not recommend these leagues. Take a couple seasons, get your feet on the ground, and do some research before you start these kind of leagues, because it can be a little tricky if you don't know what you're doing.
So let's start with the auction draft. You do have an auction order. So let's say you have the first pick of the auction order and you start with your Patrick Mahomes. It then goes around the table in order, and everybody gets to, it's not like everybody throwing numbers out there. Oh, this, that. It's not an auction like that. It goes around in order to say, okay, do you want to bid? No. Next person, do you want to bid? And once you say no, you can't come back into it. That's how some people will work it. I guess other ones you can come back into it. The one I was in, once you said no, that was it. You can't come back in and start bidding. but you can do it either way. Okay, this is 30 plus years ago, and someone invites me to be in their fantasy baseball draft, their fantasy baseball league.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the first fantasy thing I ever played, and it was an auction draft. So here I am, new to the whole fantasy thing, going into it, doing an auction draft, and call it beginner's luck, but I won the freaking league.
Wow.
That pissed everybody off.
They say beginner's luck.
Yeah, call it beginner's luck. Call it. I mean, listen, I've always been a sports geek. I've always been that guy watching all the highlights, reading the papers. And back then it was the National. Okay. I don't know if people remember the newspaper, the National, but all it was a sports paper that was put out. And I mean, I was reading that cover to cover, and that was before Sports Center became what Sports Center is. So you're not even seeing some of the highlights. You're watching the George Michael's Sports Machine on Sunday night, and now I'm dating myself, of course, but yeah. So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for auction drafts.
So to go more detail about them, so you have a budget, so you do not want to go over your budget, otherwise you end up with all the crap players at the end that nobody else is bidding on.
Let's say the league is $200 to join the league. So you have this $200 budget to spend on the draft. So you got to be really careful how much you spend on one player, because that really limits what you can pick up in other positions. I remember one year I played an auction draft for football, and I went way out on the limb on my quarterback, because back then in the day, the quarterback was the highest paid position, just like just like it is in the NFL, And next thing I know, I'm not able to bid on any player because I have no cap besides the minimum. I had 3 players left the draft. I had the minimum bid available for each player, and that was it. So I could not even bid on anybody. I could put one bid out there, but someone could go a quarter over me if they wanted to, or 50 cents over me, and get that player away from me. So I had no capability of doing anything. So at the end of the draft, here I was, after everybody was done with their draft, just picking 3 players on my team that were left there that no one else wanted. Yeah, that year I got slapped down a little bit on that year.
And the auction continues throughout the season because you get a fab budget, which is a certain amount of money that you are allowed to use to pick up the waiver wire players. And this is a little bit different than the draft because you put down your dollar amount and it's either the highest bid or you lose. So you want to put a high bid so that you can gain the player, but you don't want it to be too high where you're putting out, way more money than everybody else. Then you just wasted a bunch of cash.
Again, a whole different type of strategy. That's why we're saying this is more of the hardcore, a little more difficult to do, because it's not just having to watch your money during a draft. It's also watching your money, the budget you have throughout the year to be able to pick up players. I mean, it's amazing the amount of money that people were spending on in these, where you have the fab money, on player like Justin Jefferson in the 4th week, because he had that explosion, that coming out game in the 3rd week last year, right? So that 4th week, all of a sudden, people are spending half their fab money on this guy. Half their fab money, it's gone on the one guy they're putting out there. If they have $100 budget, some people were like, okay, $40, because they wanted this guy so bad. But there's all these different things. So this all comes into play. With when you're talking about FOB and all that inside of an auction draft. And there are some leagues that actually put the FOB in there that aren't auction leagues, just for the fact that they want to build up a kitty for end of the year.
Okay, the next difficult league we'll talk about is called a survival draft league. And the survival draft league, you probably want a lot of players in your league because every week the lowest scoring team is eliminated from the season. So you can do your draft, be super excited for your fantasy season, play week 1. You had some busts, some players got hurt, you put out the least amount of points, and now you're out. You literally are knocked out of the game. So that is super hardcore.
And that might be something you do in addition to other leagues, just because you want to try it out, just because that sounds cool to you. I mean, it actually does sound kind of cool to me. Where I might want to play one of those this year, just because I I've
The
the
thrill.
thrill of it. Yeah, it's the remember wide world of sports, wide world of sports, the the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. That is the
Yeah.
survival league right there.
And I'd say that the strategy with that is that you want a really, really well-rounded team. You don't want to have any weaknesses. You want to have a really decent bench so you don't have any holes and that you won't be affected by any bye weeks at all. Because, if you have that 1 week where you're the lowest scoring team and you're out. So you literally you don't need to necessarily have the best team. You just need to have, I'd say, like the most consistent
Yeah,
team.
consistency wins. And then hopefully when it comes down to you and the final four guys toward the end of the year, your team goes on fire.
Yeah. Next type of league is an IDP league.
IDP stands for Independent Defensive Player. You are in this league drafting individual players. So you might be drafting a Khalil Mack. You're drafting your linebacker. You're drafting your defensive end for sacks. You're drafting a safety for interceptions and tackle. It's a whole different situation. Most leagues draft team defenses. So when you're drafting a team defense, all these player stats get combined together, because on a team defense, you're getting points for interceptions, you're getting points for sacks, you're getting points for fumble recoveries, you're getting points for defensive touchdowns. And then on team defense, you're also getting points for the amount of points scored by the other team. Whereas in IDP leagues, you are getting stats from these individual players that you draft. So it's a whole different way of looking at things. You're now drafting stars instead of teams. So it's a different way, something that is interesting. People who like defenses, they would love a league like this. If you're a defensive type of guy that you just love seeing a 13-0 type of game, then this might be the league for you.
Now, the next type of league is my favorite one, and that is a keeper league. Now, keeper league is different than your redraft league because you are keeping some of those players. And depending on your league, it could be between 2 to 4 players. And depending on your league, it depends on what it costs to keep them. Now, there are a lot of leagues out there that you just keep your best players and they don't cost you anything. They're automatically on your team and you do the draft just like normal. Our league, which I like, I think it adds a little more element to the draft, is that if you draft a player in the 4th round, the next season you are able to keep them in the 4th round. And as long as they stay on your team, you'll be able to keep them in that round you're allowed to keep them for 2 seasons. That way they go back in the pool and other people get a chance to, draft their favorite players. So you don't just hog them the entire time.
Now, the only thing with this type of league, the only thing that when I first started with you last year in this league, where I know I gave you crap about it, I said, well, how come then if this player was drafted in the 4th round last year by this team, but then he was traded to another team, that team couldn't use his 4th round status. It had to go to the ADP of what this year is. So what I'm saying is, so if you did not draft that player yourself, you couldn't use his draft position. You couldn't use where he was drafted last year. If you didn't draft him yourself, let's say you picked him up, that he was an undrafted or he was waived and you picked him up and he was on your team at the end of the year, yes, you can keep him this year, but you can't use the draft position that he was last year. You have to go by his average draft position for this year. And that was the only thing that I know you and I went back and forth on, like, that's not right. That shouldn't be. And I was being a jerk.
Well, I don't think that's typical of most keeper leagues. I made that rule because I know I've said this a few times already, but years ago when Alvin Kamara was a rookie, I drafted him at the very last spot in the draft. Now, if we were to keep that rule of it doesn't matter if you trade him or not, he's always going to be kept in that round, then Alvin Kamara would always be like a 15th round cost, which means that he would always be the most valuable player on anybody's team. And I don't think that's very fair because, the people that didn't draft him, now they're getting this huge value.
But they got that value because they traded for him smartly.
Yeah, but it's just
okay. I know we're going to get
you're gonna have a pool of players that are just overpowered compared to everybody else. Is what you're gonna end up, especially if people are keep on trading for those guys. Like you have like 3 of the top running backs for your last 3 picks just because you drafted them when they're rookies and nobody thought anything of them.
See, but I think what we have in place. So in our league, guys, what it is that you're allowed to then keep that after he's drafted onto your team. Or trade. You're allowed to keep him for 2 years after that.
For that same
draft value. So my whole thing was, well, that corrects any of that other situation you're talking about. That value that corrects it because then that value goes away after after he goes back into the draft.
That could work, but it's just a lot more work for the commissioner to keep track of more players than they already do.
And folks, he's the commissioner. He didn't want to do all that work.
I did not want to do that.
So anyway, in the keeper league, yes, I love it. I love playing it. It adds a different draft strategy to what you're doing, and like I said, how we have that where you can use them in that same draft position for 2 more years after you draft them. I love it. I think that's really cool. It adds a whole different twist onto a draft and on a league.
And honestly, it really points to you want to draft, rookies later on in the draft or players that are injured and they're going later on in the draft than they normally would if they weren't injured. That way, next season,
you got great value.
Let's say Saquon Barkley, right? Let's say going into the season, he's still hurt. He's got the knee injury and he's not looking good. So now instead of being a first round pick, he's now going into the 4th round. Now you'd see that in a keeper league and you just see cha-ching because that means that the next 2 seasons, hoping that he's fully healthy now, you're getting a first round talent for a 4th round draft pick.
And great analogy on that. The other thing that you all have to know is that you could set those parameters yourself for your league. So you can set a keeper league that you keep them for 2 seasons after you draft them, or you could do it longer. You set those parameters yourselves in your league when you set up a keeper league. So that gives a lot of flexibility to exactly what you want to do. It's cool that way.
There's also one more interesting way to play keeper league is you select, 3 to 4 players that you want to keep. And you have a guaranteed keeper. And that guaranteed keeper, no matter what happens, that person is going to be on your team. But that guaranteed keeper cannot be the same position as your other 2 or 3 guys. I think it's 3 guys. Your other 3 guys cannot be the exact same position. And out of those 3 guys, you draw cards, and one of those players is going to be eliminated. So you're only keeping 3 out of the 4 that you're selecting. So it has a little more exciting element to it because is a lot more strategy, I think, because you're choosing who you want to keep. And if it's going to be like that running back, that awesome running back that everybody loves, your other 3 choices cannot be a running back.
Yeah, so you can't be like so dominant running back because of what you've done. You have to be. It balances it out in the draft.
Yeah, so you'd be like, let's say you're keeping your top wide receiver, and your other 3 guys are your top running backs, and you're just really, really hoping that your number 1 running back is still on your team and he's not the guy that gets knocked out.
For people who start off doing regular redraft leagues and everything else, this is a great league for your next step.
Yeah,
it really is.
Especially if you want to go towards dynasty leagues, I would recommend testing out keeper league first. And if you start to do well in keepers, then you can move on to dynasty.
Yeah, because dynasty league is a keeper league on steroids.
Yeah. So let's get into that right now. Dynasty League, the keeper league on steroids. So in this league, your very first draft is a startup draft, and you're just doing a regular draft, and you are keeping these players for however long you want. So next season comes around, your roster is exactly the same. You're going to drop some guys to pick up some rookies, but that's it. It adds a lot more strategy involved, because are you going for the player that's hot right now and is going to be great for this season and next season? Or are you aiming for rookies so that, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, all your rookies are now stars and now you have like a pimped out offense?
I mean, you are truly a GM, just like an NFL GM at this point. When you're playing this type of league, all these things come into play now. The only thing you're not dealing with is salary caps. You're setting up a team like a GM would set up a team.
And the second year and all the following years, you're only drafting rookies because you already have all the players already on other people's teams. You're only drafting rookies.
And again, going back to what Shane just said about, the draft is a whole lot different looking type of draft year to year, because all you're drafting right then is just rookies. You have in your rookie draft and players that were not on teams at the end of the year last year.
And your roster is going to be huge.
Yeah.
You're going to have like 5 quarterbacks.
Yeah. It's a whole different looking beast. There's a lot more preparation that goes into it. There is a lot more week to week maintenance of it. This is just really, like we said, this is the epitome of leagues. This is where this is something when you have a lot of time to do it, when you really want the challenge, but don't think you're going to do this league and get in and out of it in a year. This is a league that if you're joining a league, so for instance, let's say there's a spot open in an existing league and you're going to join in there. You have to remember, one, you're probably not going to have a good team to start with because you're taking someone else that left the league, so they probably got frustrated. So you know it's going to take you several years to build a team. So this is a huge commitment of time that this is not going to be an immediate thing you're going to see dividends from. This is, when you're looking at owning Procter & Gamble stock compared to Bitcoin stock. Bitcoin, you're looking for it right now. Procter & Gamble, you're looking over the course of time that this is going to be consistent, and that's what you want to do. So there you go. There's my analogy.
Yeah, you're in there for the long haul for sure. And it's just a lot more strategies, like you just said. Like, are you playing for right now? Are you playing for the future? And you can go years with having a bad team, and you just kind of have to, take it in the face.
I mean, seriously, just like any regular professional team, they'll have years where they're bad and they keep getting these rookies, and it takes 3-4 years for the rookies to even start playing well, to really understand how to win. It's the same thing with this type of league. Again, we want to let you know this ahead of time. This is an option for you to join. We want to make sure you know what you're getting into, because we really want you to have fun. This is truly, we want you to have fun in this hobby, this sport. This is something that we love. I've been playing, like I said, for over 30 years, and I love it. It's entertainment. It's something that over the course of years, all of my friends have all moved away from where we were as a group. But this is still something you can stay in touch with friends. Something that keeps you going from across. You can be playing with people across country. So we want you to get involved in this sport. We want you to have fun in this sport, but we want you to know what kind of league you're getting into and decide what's best for you.
I would recommend, if you're brand new to fantasy football, start yourself off in a PPR redraft league. You'll have the most players to choose from, and you're not thinking too far ahead into the future of what's going to happen the season after that, or 2-3 years down the line.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And again, if you want to do some best ball leagues, that is another great way for someone starting off to get into it, just to put their toes in the water a little bit to see what it's all about.
Especially with practicing drafts, because that's all you do is you draft, and that's it.
Yep, exactly. So, and then again, when what Shane was saying earlier, it's a great way for your pre-draft strategy in your redraft leagues, in your leagues that you're going to maintain week to week. Those best ball drafts are a great way to practice to know where players are going.
Okay, next week we'll be talking about trades and waiver acquisitions. Again, you can see all of our episodes, show notes, and content at our website at thefantasyfootballpros.com.
You can drop us a note anytime you want. If you want to email us directly, it's Mark at thefantasyfootballpros.com or Shane at thefantasyfootballpros.com. If you have direct questions you want to ask us, email us if you want.
Or if you want to email both of us, it's hello at thefantasyfootballpros.com. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.